Yeah. All right. Good morning. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Happy Sabbath to my panelists. Happy Sabbath to everyone who has logged in for our live stream. Uh, our panel discussion on the Desire of Ages. Today's chapter is chapter 35, Peace Be Still. My name is Marvin Lee. I'll be facilitating today's discussion. I am currently one of the elders at Eastside SDA Fellowship. I'm an attorney. For 19 years, I was an insurance defense attorney. Exactly 7 weeks ago, I started a new job doing the other side now. I'm doing plaintiff's work. That's been very exciting for me. My wife is Jeannie Lee. She cooks a lot of delicious food for people. You'll probably know her that way. And I'm just real excited to be part of today's panel discussion. I'm going to ask our other panelists to briefly introduce themselves.
I'll jump in next. Ted Swinier, and I am manager with Amazon Web Services. Really excited to be joining the panel today and looking forward to both sharing my perspective and learning from the other gentlemen here today on what they were able to pull from chapter 35 of the Desire of Ages.
Good morning. My name is Esmond Chan. I've been with Eastside Fellowship for a few months now and enjoy the place greatly. I'm in healthcare accounting, been doing that for about 24 years, and glad to be on the panel today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard. I've been on this panel a good number of times. Very happy to be here. I'm a real estate attorney working in downtown currently for a large firm. Very junior to Marvin, but very happy to be here and happy to learn from the gentlemen on this panel.
That's Richard's very nice way of saying I'm old, which I am. I'm hoping to be a grandfather as soon as possible. Okay, so today's chapter is really awesome. It's, as you can probably infer from the title, Peace Be Still. It's a famous 3 words that Jesus spoke when he was in the fisherman's boat during a tempest. Sometimes we think of, well, this is a lake. How could the storm have been so bad? But it was so bad that even the disciples who were on board, who were seasoned fishermen, who would have been on boats their whole lives, would have been in storms, they did everything they could possibly do to try to save themselves during this violent storm. And then at the very last moment when they thought they were going to die, they woke up Jesus, who was sound asleep in the boat, entreating him to save them. And he did. And he did, and the disciples who were on board with him, everyone who heard, they were just amazed because they said, "Who is this that even the wind and the seas listen to his voice?" Well, we all know who that is, right? He's not just Jesus the man; he's actually our Creator God as well. Moving along from that, the stories in this chapter. When they get back on land, focus on the 2 demoniacs who rushed at Jesus and his disciples. They literally had iron shackles that were broken, hanging from their wrists. Open wounds and sores from themselves, tearing at their own flesh. They terrorized that region for a long time, and they rushed at Jesus and his disciples. Only at the last moment to throw themselves at the feet of Jesus, who rid them of those demons. And then the demons, when identifying themselves, they said, "We are legion." It wasn't just a demon apiece, it was a legion of demons. And they asked to be banished into a herd of pigs, of swine, who then promptly threw themselves over a cliff and perished. Only to anger the owners, the businessmen who owned those pigs, and that's presents quite another interesting conflict at the end of the chapter. So a lot of different things to talk about because these stories bring up a lot of important themes and questions. So we're gonna launch into the questions. The very first one is a little bit of a departure too, because apparently this is the point in Jesus' ministry when he first actually starts to teach in parables. And we know that that is a very common vehicle that Jesus used to teach the people and his disciples. So the first question is this. The chapter begins with commenting on Jesus teaching in parables. What is your favorite parable and why?
Marvin, I'll start off. One of my favorite parables is the parable of the wheat, where the overnight, there's good seeds, and then an enemy came and planted bad seeds, and that they both grew up. They are both given the opportunity to grow together up in the ground, and it's not harvested till the end. So it reminds me, in our daily lives that, to many extent, when we, there's weeds among us, we become weeds sometimes through our behaviors and reactions to others. And that, God, as, being a Christian, God is not just interested in removing the weeds from our, daily lives, but for us to work through them and rely on his providence and his strength that builds faith and trust. And, and similar to the chapter that we're reading today, to have peace in the storm, to reach into the peace that God is able to give us.
Awesome, thanks.
I'll jump in next. The one that keeps coming to mind is the Good Samaritan. Who is our neighbor? And that message is so important, back in Jesus' day, but also so important to us today. We live in a world where there are so many forces that are, for a lot of reasons, trying to pull us apart, that are trying to separate us, divide us into us versus them, or focus on the differences that we have amongst each other. But there are so many brothers and sisters out there around the world, close to home here, in our own local communities. These are our neighbors, and being, like we see in the parable of the Good Samaritan, being willing to help those around us, at no small cost. It wasn't cheap. It was socially very uncomfortable, I imagine, to reach out, to step out of the bubble to help. So, Good Samaritan, the one speaking to me.
I'd say the parable of the lost sheep found in Matthew. He says, if a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And that, for me, that speaks volumes. I mean, how often, I can't count the number of times I feel lost every day, on an everyday basis, and feel like I'm not doing enough, that I'm not being as good of a Christian as I can be. And oftentimes I hear of friends who are atheists or agnostic, and they feel like they're just so far gone the other way that there's no hope in coming back, or they feel as if they've left God. But I think the meaning of this parable is that God will never leave you. He will always search for you, regardless of whether the 99% is with him, if he ever has that. And that for me was very impactful, and that's kind of the mindset that gives me hope and allows me to share the gospel, I think, on an everyday basis with people who are non-believers.
Awesome. My favorite parable, or one of them, is about the man who finds a great treasure buried in a field. He immediately goes and he sells everything that he has, so that he may purchase the field with the great treasure in it. I love that because it just kind of so clearly cuts to the chase, right? We get so bogged down and so preoccupied with with the things in this world, the things we're trying to accumulate, whether it's money or status or possessions. But this parable just tells us, look, when you truly understand that this treasure, which is eternal life, which is redemption, which is a reconciliation with your creator God, is available to you, then you would gladly sell everything that you have in your life, because it pales in comparison with that treasure, with that eternal uh, uh, reconciliation, with that relationship with God. So no wonder Jesus taught in parables, because it's so powerful, right? For, as you know, across that whole spectrum, whether they're, you know, the poor, uneducated, or the scribes, the rabbis who had spent their entire lives studying the Torah. So great. All right, let's move on to the second question. That's a good way to warm up. I'm going to go ahead and put the second question in the chat. All right, the disciples, some of whom were skilled and experienced fishermen, all believed they were going to die in the violent tempest. Have you ever been in a situation where you feared for your life, and do you believe God delivered you? Please share.
So currently as a real estate attorney, I mean, the biggest danger I face on an everyday basis is, paper cuts, or, my computer blowing up. But as a background, before I was an attorney, I served in the Army. I was an Army officer. I was a Ranger, and I deployed in Afghanistan from 2016 to 2017. And when I read this question, I was actually kind of trying to think of the times where I was truly fearing for my life. There were instances where I felt I was in danger, but where I truly felt, scared that I might die. And I could only kind of think of a few, and one of them was during Afghanistan. Um, this was during a time where I was in the middle of a 10-month deployment, probably along month 4 or 5, and we had constantly been running presence patrols in the area. So what that is we take out 4 trucks. I, as the platoon leader, we'd basically account for who's going to go on this patrol. We'd take around 20 to 30 guys, depending on the mission. And I, as a platoon leader, I'm the guy in charge of the entire group. I usually have to be in the middle of the element, but I always was very gung-ho, and I always try to lead from the front. So I literally did that. I always was sitting in the front vehicle every single mission I did. And over the course of the deployment, we did over 100 patrols, but there was this one mission in the middle of that deployment where the commander, he pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, Rich, I know you've been sitting in the front of the vehicle for all these patrols. Why don't you consider sitting in the middle for this one?" And it was a mission where, I don't know why he said that, but it was a mission where we're going to go out at night at around 3 a.m. to a new part of this town, and we had to secure an airfield. And this airfield was important because we hadn't been receiving supplies from a fixed wing, or just an airplane. We had been receiving supplies from helicopters, and receiving supplies that way, where they would just kind of hover over and drop supplies. But now they were going to deliver, some luxury items like portable AC units, hot food that we could create, rather than just MREs. So we were actually really stoked for it, but it was in an area that we had never been before, and it was along a road that I had never been along. And a lot of the ways that the enemy would, attack convoys like this were through IEDs, vehicle-borne IEDs, and these are basically improvised explosive devices where you really have no idea they're there until you either get attacked by a vehicle, or you literally just run over it. And if you can imagine, at 3 a.m. at night in Afghanistan, it's not like Seattle or New York City where there's a bunch of lights on every single road. There are actually like no lights on any of the roads. The roads are very unimproved. There's dust constantly kicking up at night, and you can barely see where you're going. So for me, I just felt in my chest, I was like, wow, I have a sinking feeling. I never wrote a will before I went on this deployment. I was so determined that I would come back. I was just so full of the faith that there's nothing that could harm me on this deployment. But it was the first time where I felt scared, and I began to pray. And my soldiers, they also felt like something had changed in the dynamic of my behavior, and that wasn't a good thing. But they saw that, and they saw that I prayed, and they were like, "Hey, sir, could we pray with you?" And we all prayed together. And these were a bunch of guys that, they weren't necessarily Christians or believers in any religion, but they wanted to pray because we were a team and we were all doing this together. And once we prayed, we all felt, I don't know, we all felt as a lightness in our hearts. We started playing Snoop Dogg on the radio while we were leaving the gate. We were loose and we were ready. And that was kind of the attitude we felt that night. We were ready, but we were loose and we weren't pent up or felt as if there was the weight on our chest. And nothing happened on that mission. God bless. And we secured the airfield. We brought back the AC units, and that was really a luxury item that we enjoyed throughout the rest of the deployment. But long story short, it really was the power of prayer. Something simple as a 20-second prayer between a bunch of guys that really made the difference for me and really took away that fear of losing my life. And I still remember that to this day, and I still value that story. And it's a story that we still share among a lot of the veterans that I deployed with. So that's it.
That's amazing because actually when I wrote this question, I was like kind of hoping that you would draw it as far as leading it because I expected you would actually have, because of your military experience, you'd have some really vivid examples for us. Nothing happened, so a skeptical person might say, "Oh well, you got lucky, or it didn't really matter." But I think that we, in our human experience, we have more than just the five senses, and I think that uh, what your commander said, what you felt, what all your soldiers felt, I think there was true danger there, right? I think that God did put His covering hand over you, that He respected the volition that you and all the soldiers had to be able to access His protection. I mean, it's war, for goodness sake. People die. And when you tell me this story, I truly believe that He put His covering hand over you and your soldiers, and what a wonderful witness it was for those who joined in into that prayer.
Marvin, I'll just jump in real quick. I'm watching the YouTube chat and I see Pastor Sam jumping in. He was just saying, thank you for sharing that story, Richard. And he made the point that he thought it was so interesting that in the face of chaos, the natural inclination of mankind, like you mentioned, not even folks that were Christians, were to reach out to God. So just saw that popped up in the chat. Thank you for sharing that, Pastor Sam. Wanted to pass that along.
That's great. I want to thank Ted for taking on some of the tech duties that normally Sam does, and we're happy to be able to support Sam as he juggles so many balls, especially on a Sabbath morning. Thank you, Ted. We appreciate hearing the input of our listeners, including our Pastor Sam. Okay, let's move to the third question, and that's this. How do we obtain the peace that passes understanding, even times of great turmoil, anguish, or even physical danger?
That's a great question from what Richard had just shared. Really, that sense of danger and reaching out to God. And I think about the fishermen. That's what they did. That's their job. Their whole life. Being on the lake, their training, their experience, their expertise, and yet they were not able to steer the boat safely during the storm. It reminds me, on a daily, in our careers, or being an attorney and manager, or me in healthcare finance, we've spent so many years doing, in this exact field. We are confident in our knowledge, our expertise. We are paid to lead, a lot of different things. And when challenges come up, we feel like it's our duty that we should know how to solve it. We have the experience, we have the knowledge, and that we feel, an obligation that we should be able to do it and rely on our own strength. And what's interesting here in this passage is really to, sort of God is asking us to do the opposite when things are not going our way and there's danger. He's asking us to be still, to reach out to Him. That's the only way we can obtain the peace that only He can give us. To be still, to listen to the direction, to pray. So that's it.
Desmond.
I'll jump in next. And man, Richard, loved your story. My career is much more along the lines of potential paper cuts, or man, like if I manage to strain my hands while I'm typing. But even in the more pedestrian white collar world, it's sometimes hard to find peace. Everything is so busy. There's always so much going on this time of year, particularly, our team gets hit really hard around year end, and trying to find that peace amidst the storm is really hard. And, the verse that I keep coming back to, the theme for really, the past 10 years of my career for me is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through God or through Christ who strengthens me. And it's amazing. I've seen over and over in my life. I think I shared this in the last time I was on the panel. I'm your type A personality. I push hard. I want to get as far as I can. I've been blessed with talents, but the greatest opportunities and the greatest successes in my career have been when I hit the wall and I realize, okay, I can't do this. This is too much. All right, God, I'm going where I should have from the very beginning. You got to help me. I'm not going to be able to get through this without you. Like we read in the story of, the disciples in the storm. They were fishermen. They've been doing this for years, man. Like they knew this, the Sea of Galilee, they knew this inside and out. But instead of leaning on their own strength, they leaned on God. That was what they needed. And I feel like that is so important as just a core lesson in all aspects of our life.
Thank you, Ted. Really for my entire legal career, I've been a trial attorney, whether it was as a prosecutor, which is my first job, actual job out of law school, or public defender, or insurance defense attorney. Now, it's this kind of fourth big chapter of my life, representing people who were severely injured. And there's a tremendous amount of stress leading up to trial. And there's a lot of posturing, gamesmanship with the other side, right? You've negotiated potential settlements, but you haven't quite agreed. And then at some point, often you reach a point of playing chicken, right? Are you going to accept that last offer, or are you going to forge ahead to trial? And the other side, if their skill, tries to push buttons to try to make you stressed or worried about, if things don't go well for you, you're going to let down your client, or you're going to fail. And something that I've really highlighted is I had shared with you folks that I thought I might not have these questions done because I was preparing for my first trial in my new job on Monday. And I ended up being able to settle it for the right amount. But I had to hit a point of peace. And the way I did that was to ask myself, can I live with the worst case scenario? If that worst case scenario happens, what happens to me? What happens to my client? Will I be able to articulate that I came to this decision based on principles of integrity and doing what was best for my client? That's what attorneys need to have as a guiding principle. And once I did, then I was able to have peace and press forward, not take the bait and hold out and get the right result for my client. And I thought about that in terms of this question in our lives as Christians, right? We are going to face all sorts of turmoil, and as we believe the end times get more and more dangerous physically, as well as, when it comes to questions of our faith. I think it really comes down to that. Can we live with the worst case scenario? And the worst case scenario is we die. But if we die in the Lord, right, it's not the end. And if we have that assurance of salvation, then, and if it's a true belief, not a halting one, or kind of, halfway one, then we truly have the peace that passes understanding. And that's something that the entire world just does not have. And to me is so beautiful about being a Christ follower. All right. Wow, this is great. Sometimes I write too many questions, and then we get great discussions. And here we're only on number 4, but let's go ahead and dive into that. When the owners of the swine who were lost heard of this news, regret and indignation for their temporal loss blinded their eyes to the Savior's mercy. Does this yet happen today, and how?
I'll jump in on this one. So here's a funny random connection. My last name is Swinyer. It's from Serbia, somewhere in there. I had a roommate from Serbia years ago, and he's like, hey, your ancestors must have been pig farmers or pig herders because, Swinyer, likely means swine herders. So I was thinking about that as I was reading the story and, these poor swine herders who lost, all their flocks. But, the broader point here is how easy it is for us to get blinded by temporal loss. And I love that word, temporal in this case, the worldly rather than the spiritual things. And man, it's so easy. Again, you see that in the parables that Jesus told, the rich young ruler as the easy example there, but that still holds so true today. And, whether you are chasing that next big promotion, or just trying to make sure you're providing for your family, on both sides of the spectrum, like it is a real thing. We want to have the best for our kids. We want to be able to, have the things, that we are so blessed in, a wealthy, modern culture, whether that's, the newest phone or the newest whatever. And this is, another really important reminder. Here were people literally talking to the Son of God, and they were telling him to go away because they were more worried about whether they would be able to have their livelihood continue. And it really gives me pause. Are we so focused on moving forward with the next opportunity in our life that we're telling God to go away?
There's this moment of silence as we let all that seep in, right? Which is, I think, why Ellen White posed this question to all of us. Okay, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah. So, in this situation, the great thing was that the town no longer needed to worry about these men who were really posing a danger to society. Instead, they shifted their focus on what went wrong. And I think that's so often the case in how we live today. We focus on the things that go wrong, and we're not grateful for the things that go right, for the things that we just take for granted. Being able to just start your car, having your car turn on that morning and drive to work and not get in a car accident, or just be gainfully employed. Things that I feel like we should be so grateful for, and we honestly wouldn't be there with the support of the family and God. And I think a lot of times whenever things go wrong, that's when we start lashing out and saying, hey, God, why don't you prevent this? Why don't you stop this? Or start blaming. So that's kind of just the observation that I saw, and just the self-reflection that I had when reading this question and this passage. Just made me want to be more grateful for things that I just take for granted, and not really focus on what goes wrong, because a lot of times what goes wrong that's not something God chooses for us. That's just free will and the world.
Before we move forward, I'll throw one other thing here. Something else that blows me away when I'm reading The Desire of Ages is thinking about Ellen White. And reading through this, and I ran across the word pecuniary. I'm like, whoa, that's an interesting word. What does that mean? And I looked it up, and relating or consisting of money. And it was another one of those moments where I thought, wow, here is somebody who I think she had like a third grade education. and was willing to let herself be used by God. And here she was reaching some pretty incredible writing that still holds up well today, and is challenging us, and is bringing us to a closer appreciation for the Bible and God. So again, another example of what letting God work through you can do.
Yeah, I love Ellen White's writing. It's even like seeping into my questions. My last question said, "Does this yet happen today?" I was like, "Wait, that sounds kind of like Ellen White lingo." Uh, yeah, real quick before we move on, kind of the flip side to this is something that I thought about. If it's your absorption in temporal wealth and temporal belongings, possessions that that keep you chained to a dynamic uh, of self-sufficiency and therefore self-justification. Uh, in the eternal scheme of things, if something happens to jolt you loose from that sense of security, that ultimately is a false security, then it could really be God delivering you, right? From an eternal uh, reliance on something that will disappear and shift you towards something that can actually save you into eternity. All right, let's move to number 5. The two men who were rid of their host of demons begged to come with Jesus, but he bade them instead, here I go talking like Ellen White, he bade them instead to go home and evangelize to the people of Decapolis. The author said they received a greater blessing from this and drew closer to Jesus this way than if they'd simply followed him wherever he went. What do you think of this, and how does this apply to us as Christ followers today?
This one was one of the moments, like that record scratch in my head. I was reading along, and all of a sudden it's like, well, hang on a minute, wait, what? And I read, I went back and I read, and I think it's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where you can read in the Gospels this same story. I'm like, I had never caught this point before. And I thought it was just really fascinating. Here was Jesus challenging them, to go and take, that he had just met them. I mean, this wasn't where he had been working with them over a long period of time. They didn't have deep insight. They hadn't been sitting there listening to all the parables, but he's telling them to go and tell others, to be evangelists. And this really struck me as interesting, and the benefit that they got from this, to your question, is something that I think is worth considering. It's really easy, speaking from my experience, to get very comfortable in your comfortable Christian Adventist community, where you spend a lot of time, and you're learning and you're listening, and this is all good. And this is important, but also, going out, telling others, sharing your experience, even if your experience is as simple as Jesus healed me, or Jesus, helped me through this terrible experience. And it really made me think that maybe there is more to it that we as a community should be thinking about. Should we be challenging ourselves? And are we missing out on blessings by not taking this to heart?
And I think about, Jesus asking those two, I mean, these were men, they were possessed by demons, to go evangelize to the town. It's kind of, many times we think about, sort of good people, being on, you're a good Christian, you have done well, and you're the one that should, be doing the evangelizing and those things. But the lives of those men and what they've gone through was such a huge testimony that God used that to spread his message in a much more powerful manner. So that kind of struck me is that the testament, like Ted was mentioning, a testament of what God has done into our lives, anything that we can share. I think it's a very powerful way to reach out to the world.
And I really like how Ted said comfort, because that made me think, when you just follow God and live kind of um, that linear lifestyle of just, within the community and not really stepping outside of your comfort zone. Um, I wonder if there's a bigger impact that you could be doing by actually stepping into a more uncomfortable position. And I think what was really cool was that, these, as Esmond mentioned, these two healed men, they didn't have any, doctrinal learning, or at least we could see. And they're possessed by demons, and them going out and becoming missionaries was quite powerful, because I think the people around them, when they saw, hey, if these men could be changed, if these men who were at the depths of humanity, who were really, possessed, could turn their lives around and become followers in Christ, like that is an amazing piece of just it's a great piece of evidence that God is real. And I think that is a great that's such a great testimony that these two men could be spreading throughout the world. And that's a message to us, where every one of us, we have our own stories and we have our own obstacles and journeys, and we might surprise ourselves if we step outside of our comfort zone and just tell our story of what we know and what we've experienced, because we never know that of the people listening to the stories, when they say, hey, maybe you're not that perfect person that has lived their life like perfectly. Maybe you're someone that I could relate to. I wonder if that could establish a connection with them better in some circumstances than, just not. I don't know if that made sense, but it was a thought that I had when Ted said comfort. I was like, oh, that's a really good point of comfort and stepping outside your comfort zone. And I could have articulated that a little bit better, but those are just initial thoughts that I had.
And Marvin, I know I'm jumping to the next question already, but I love the segue you just put out there, Richard. I think that there's something really powerful that if I come and I tell you a story in the abstract, or I tell you, hey, here's something that you should believe, that is so much less impactful than saying, here is my story. Here is my experience. This is what God did, not hypothetically, but here is the blessings that I have received in my life. Or in this case, here's how God transformed their individual lives. And I think that's something, again, we all should understand, that God isn't calling us to go to seminary and spend 30 years and become the best pastor and evangelist. He's asking us to tell about him in our lives and what he's done for us to those around us. And that doesn't have to be anything other than our story of what God's done for us.
Yeah, I'm glad that you referenced the next question, because we definitely have gone into that area. Just for completeness, I'll read that into everyone's hearing here, and then we'll continue the discussion. Number 6 was the healed demoniacs were sent to be missionaries before they had received any great learning or doctrines from Jesus. How were they so effective in spreading the good news to that region? And how does this lesson apply to us? Ted, you kind of spoke to that. If you have any other thoughts, otherwise we can check with other members of the panel.
Yeah, I feel like I shared what I had. I'd love to hear Esmond, Richard, or Marvin, anything y'all have to share on that one.
What comes to mind, just an example that comes to mind, when I think about a person that can quote every Bible scripture but doesn't care about his neighbor, that kind of is that a good witness of the gospel? It's not that we don't want. It's a balance, right? That God is about love, and we need to see what God's love has done into our lives, and project that out to our neighbors, people, our friends, people in the workplace. That's much more, I guess, effective, right, than sort of, preaching and, knowing all the verses and all the parables. So, again, being a witness, that personal story and how that impacts our lives is so much more powerful.
Eastside SDA Fellowship started in the year 2000. Last week we celebrated because the board announced that we had met our goals for church budget as well as the tithe. There's certain tithe requirements that the conference holds us accountable to continue having a full-time pastor. That's us now, but back in 2000, we didn't have a pastor. In fact, we did not have even a half-time pastor for like maybe 6, 7, 8 years. So it fell to very unqualified people like myself, most unqualified, and people like Don, Kosuke, Steve to give the sermons week in, week out. And there was a time I felt so unworthy that, hey, I didn't have any kind of formal training in theology, that I actually went online and researched, different online masters in divinity. So I think, well, maybe I could do this, on weekends and so forth, and then have a degree, and therefore when I stand up and give sermons, have more authority and qualifications for this. As you can imagine, with 3 young kids and Jeannie and I both working full time, that didn't really end up happening. And I'm glad though that rather than say, well, okay, I'm not qualified to be a preacher, so I'm just not going to do it, that we stumbled through it, and God did not, and God blessed, and He grew us, and He brought us to a point that we're at today, and we believe that He'll continue to bless us. I guess the point is that God doesn't require pieces of paper issued by man, right, to use us to grow His kingdom. And it doesn't mean that everyone is called to stand up and give a sermon, or everyone is called to give doctrinal studies. But He equips each of us, right, to be effective in our sphere of influence, telling our story in a way that will draw people to the foot of the cross. All right, number 7. In our modern times, we do not often hear of legitimate instances of demon possession. What does the writer say these biblical examples teach us about the power and impact of sin in all of our lives?
Yeah, so I'll take this. We see sin everywhere. From our workplaces, our churches, our recreational centers, whether you play sports or do whatever, and even in our homes. And the illustration of the demon-possessed men, it's kind of an illustration of how far Satan is willing to go to bring us down and to his depths, and how far we can fall if we choose to, keep pushing God away. And for me, that's kind of a scary kind of illustration, because it's like, wow, that could become a reality. That's not a reality that I want to live in. But at the same time, knowing that sin is constantly around us and exists everywhere, those are all opportunities of where we could also spread the gospel and also touch people and bring them closer to God. In the workplaces, maybe you're in a workplace where not everyone's a Christian, and there's certain actions that you could be doing where you show God's love. We're not necessarily evangelizing by speaking the gospel to them, but just showing them love, showing them patience. If someone writes you a bad evaluation, a bad peer evaluation, maybe you don't lash out and retaliate. Maybe you write them a good one and you talk about how nice they are, and you basically crush them with love. Or in my case, if there's a partner that's a little bit difficult to work with, just constantly being understanding and understanding why he or she might be feeling that way. And they might be surprised, and they might not recognize it for a long time. But I think there's actions and there's opportunities that we can do every day, little by little, where our actions will pay off over time, over the course of time, and that helps not only them but also helps us, because we're just because we go to church and just because we do Bible study and just because we call ourselves Christians doesn't mean that we can also fall into the same trap, the same depths that these demoniacs fell into. So it's just a good reminder that that's a possibility, but these are opportunities that we can become champions for God and spread the gospel in those difficult circumstances.
I've often pondered why in modern times we don't seem to see what are considered legitimate instances of demon possession, whereas in the Bible, right, especially in the New Testament, it seemed like every other person Jesus was healing was a demon-possessed soul. I think part of it, I think there's a few different ways to consider it. I think part of it is that Satan picks the most effective means to deceive in any generation. I think if there were such vivid examples of actual demon possession, it would wake people up from their complacency that, oh, this is all just fairy tales, or this can all just be explained scientifically. And even now they do, right? If someone presents and they appear to be demon possessed, there's got to be a DSM category for that, paranoid delusions or whatnot. But the other thing that struck me is, some of the most popular shows on streaming services or something, there'll be like these documentaries, true crime, and some of the most popular ones are ones that study like serial killers and that kind of thing. Here in this modern era, we have people who are so ensconced in sin that they do unspeakable things, that they take perverse pleasures from torturing, from killing, right? Just the most horrible things that you can imagine. That happens now, and it seems even more so, right? When we should otherwise be benefiting from all these advances, not just in medicine and science, but even psychotherapy, psychology, and that sort of thing. It just because we don't see and hear, a demon possession, someone's head rotated around other than in the movies. To me, what we still see in terms of the depravity of human action and nature just underscores, the intensity of the great controversy as it continues on today. All right, let's move on to number 8. Has there been some powerful sin, addiction, or negative character trait that you were powerless to overcome on your own? Were you able to receive deliverance from it through God's power and grace? Please share.
I'll jump in here, Marvin. Something that I'm still kind of struggling with, being parents, and, my personality is type A and I get things done, sort of like Ted. If something is, I just get it done and stay on top of things. So, seeing my children grow up and at certain times, not doing what they're supposed to be doing, slacking off their homework, missing things, it really annoys me a lot. Or, going through homework with them, explaining it 3 times and for them to not understand. I have to, it's, when I look back at, I've come, a lot of regrets in the past about my reaction to those instances, and over time, it's still a struggle, and it's still something that I ask God to help me every single day. Just give me, the infinite patience, and to be the parent that my children need to be the best that they can be. And that I am not, it's, the element of control, when they're younger, you have the control, but as they're as they mature and as they grow into younger adults, I think that's it's very challenging to me to deal with every single day and the frustration. So it's something that I'm still praying about every single day.
I like to joke. I knew a lot about parenting, and then I became a parent, and I realized just how little I knew. And man, Esmond, you hit that right on the money. It's amazing how much having kids and dealing with the stress that comes along with that brings forward the challenges that you are still working through. And like you're calling out, oh my word, patience every single day. You know, asking God for wisdom and patience, and the ability to have that. And then in my world too, like I was mentioning earlier, type A personality, man, pride, and the temptation to go it alone, to be self-sufficient, to think, oh, I can get through this. And I know we only have about 10 minutes left, so I'll stop there. We could keep going on for a while, but there are so many things that we all struggle, and we're lying to ourselves if we're not. We all need God. It may not be as visible as what the demoniacs are showing in this story, but we need a savior who can clean us from the inside out.
If Richard may have something to share, but I just wanted to comment on the theme of parenting, because I'm probably a lot farther along than well, Richard's not a dad yet, but he probably will be someday. And Esmond and Ted, we know you guys have younger kids than ours. Boy, what a journey that is. And it's so easy to your kids are going to struggle. I mean, didn't we all struggle growing up? Life is hard, childhood, being a juvenile, being a teenager, it's just so hard. It's amazing that we get through it. Then as a parent, you see them struggle, and then boy, it can really hit home, and you can really sorrow about mistakes we've made. When the kids were younger, my focus was more thinking, they have to have an authority figure in the house. And my authority means I have to always be right. Because if I'm wrong, then that weakens my authority. Or it's okay if I'm a little scary, because they need to have, they need to quake in their boots a bit. They need to know that there's consequences if they break the rules, or if they do wrong. And that's probably one of my biggest sorrows and the biggest mistakes that I made, because you need to have rules, you need to have discipline, all that. You need to be clear and consistent. That I'm not taking away from that, but they need even more, right? Is to experience grace. What they need to experience on a daily basis is they're gonna project onto God what they see and receive from you. So if we always tell them, hey, God, Jesus loves you unconditionally, but then we love them conditionally, right? And we say, well, we're going to be pleased with you and cherish you and celebrate you, really only when you achieve things, then what are we telling them about how God relates to us? And over time, I recognize the most vital thing that we need to do as parents is, as much as possible, be a reassuring and clear and consistent reflection of unconditional love. Because if they can experience that from us, then we get out of the way of their relationship with God and seeing him through that lens, instead of, a judgmental lens, or a fire and brimstone's lens, or a pointing at you in condemnation lens. And kind of coming to that recognition made me realize how important it was, when I did make a mistake with my kids, right? I came down too hard, or was unfair, or I didn't give them a chance for me to understand, what had led up to their transgression or whatnot. One of the most freeing things in those situations was for me to apologize to my kids and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And as I matured as a parent, I recognized that those instances, rather than weakening my authority, weakening my effectiveness as their parent, actually strengthened it. Because then they realize that I love them so much that I was willing to put my pride, right, my authority, and be vulnerable and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then it gave them permission to be wrong. It gave them, an understanding that, hey, there's grace, and recognize that relationship became so much the stronger because of it. I know you guys didn't ask for my advice as a parent, but I'm sorry I gave it to you.
Take it every day,
All right. Well, we've got 5 minutes.
We appreciate.
It's not so much advice. It's just kind of my sharing. Hey, this is some mistakes and how I learned from it. Well, we've got 4 minutes left, so let's move on to the last question. What insight from today's reading and discussion was most impactful to you, and why?
I'll say the story of the demoniacs, about how they really changed their lives when God touched them, and despite not having any years of seminary learning or any type of doctrinal learning, they were able to become great missionaries and spread the gospel, and do great work for God. And that really just made an impact on me, because we could all share our stories and go out and become missionaries for God.
You took what I was going to say, Richard, so I'm going to say something else. So that was good. And for me, the same. The other thing I took away, just, kind of the funny connection, thinking back to my pig herding ancestors and the story of the pig herders today, don't lose sight of the most important thing, which in this story and in our lives is Christ. There are so many things in our temporal world. We can be so focused on our pecuniary or fiscal situations or life in general. Don't lose sight of, the Savior right in front of us.
Yeah, and to add to that, both Richard and Ted's point is God shows that from this passage, he can use anyone in any circumstance to witness, for his kingdom, demon possessed individuals, to evangelize for him. It's just a very strong message that, he can use, any one of us, all of us, in our own situations, our own experiences with life, to be able to share that. And it, to summarize for me, it's like it reminds me, I was looking this up, Philippians 4:6, which is, don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. It's just a constant reminder to, seek God in everything that we do and not rely on our own strength and understanding.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the chapter. I love this discussion. For me, what more vivid example that when Jesus stands up in this boat, and at his word, the winds and the waters, the storm obeys, and he can do that because he created the winds and the water, and he created us, and such a vivid example that we serve a God who is limitless in power, and so we can trust that no challenge or difficulty here on this earth is too great for him to overcome. And that trust then leads to transformation of our characters, all these bad character traits that we struggle to but can't overcome on our own. When we surrender that to him, he can, because just like he created the water and the winds and the land, he also created us in our hearts, and he can give us that freedom. And then when he does give us that freedom, what a wonderful, powerful tool that is, right? To witness, because those stories have the genuineness and the power to actually touch people's hearts So he's given us each a vehicle and a story that truly is good news to be able to share with others. All right, 10:15, we did good. We got through all 9 of these questions. Thanks so much to my panelists. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and listened to the discussion. We invite everyone to join us for church service in exactly 1 hour, 11:15 in person, or if you're away out of town, please tune in and worship with us via live stream. God bless.